Hi, and welcome to this third-part series all about MCAT, and this is part 3. On this segment tonight, I've got two MCAT board members with me, Bill Norman to my immediate left, and then Michael Regan on the end. The topic for tonight is controversy and balance in public access programming. So anyway, I thought I'd start by trying to define what's a controversial program, you know?
Well, it's in the eye of the beholder, you know. Some people's controversy is other people's sort of wonder bread, I think, and that's sort of what Access TV is all about. It's allowing people to put out there what they want to put out there within certain restrictions, and then let people make their own judgments for after that. Some people may find something very controversial, which other people take for granted, and vice versa. So,
yeah, I think that's kind of a key point, you know, that the controversy is in the eye of the beholder, and so as an access facility, we're aware that something's controversial when the community tells us that it is. That, you know, oh, gee, a lot of calls are coming in, or a politician has taken up this particular show as a, you know, indicative of a problem with the facility, that kind of thing. Tonight, even though, you know, I know the show is occasioned by a contemporary, a current, and ongoing controversial program at MCAT, I wanted to make sure that what we were going to talk about was the policy and the issues of the policy for access in the community, and nothing about the particular merits of this instance. So, I mean, I don't think we necessarily have to say, gee, we're not going to say anything about the instance to even identify it, but I mean, I guess you guys both know that that's kind of what we're after. It's not the merits of that particular instance, but really what it means for us.
I would hope people would be making judgments for themselves about that show, and
yeah,
not waiting for us to tell them.
Right, I agree. But I know that what we're responding to is that we feel people are making judgments about the access facility because the show is going on, you know. And in, you know, thinking about the show and stuff, and you guys know, but just to let the viewers know, that there is an entity called the Alliance for Community Media. It's a national organization that's kind of an umbrella organization for access centers all over the country. I think at their last count, they were saying there were about 2,000 access centers distributed across the U.S. that show about 15,000 hours a week collectively of programming. And then of this 15,000 hours a week, about 1% or less is deemed controversial programming. In any event, they have a listserv, you know, where someone can pose a question to anyone that is subscribing to this listserv, made up of access center managers, board of directors. So the question I asked was this: what does anyone think of the notion that offering equal time on public access to a group attacked by independent producers is not enough fairness? Then I write a little further: I know it is an old strategy to invite the outraged, injured, or complaining to put their own views forward on the offending access channel. But an attacked group may not want to enter the arena of a public forum. The access channel, by providing a public forum for an attack, can only offer its own forum as a consolation prize. Is this enough? And that's kind of what I asked, you know, and I can sympathize with someone who's the subject of this, where, you know, we're here, and, you know, through our agency, independent producers are able to get out a message that the community takes note of. People with a complaint have a lot of avenues to get out a message about a complaint or an accusation. They can make leaflets. They can buy time on commercial TV if they'll allow them to do that. They can stand up at the busiest street corner or on a highway with signs. So there's a lot of avenues out there anyway. Well, okay, so I'll read some of the responses I got. Here's one from Joe Van Eden, and he is a very strong figure in the development of public access centers. I guess he's considered the grandfather, or, you know, the founding father of access to a degree. Anyway, he writes back, I'm not even sure why fairness is an issue. The fairness doctrine never applied to PEG, and we're going to be saying that maybe a bit, or I will. That's public education and governmental access channels. The presumption was that if the channels were in fact open to opposing viewpoints, that was enough. He goes on to say, in First Amendment terms, the right to respond is the most anyone should be able to demand under normal circumstances. In other words, we don't allow government to shut up one group merely because another group is offended by a speech but prefers not to respond to it. In the marketplace of ideas, you can put up or shut up, but it is not fair to silence others. Obviously, and this is, something to talk about, obviously that rule does not apply where someone is yelling fire in a crowded theater. So what he's referring to is unprotected speech. So in answer to your question, it is plenty fair and plenty reasonable to require the offended group to respond. I don't know, I'll just ask you guys what you think of that. To require the offended group to respond.
How do you require them? I mean,
Right.
We can sit here and require all kinds of things, but unless we get the police, I don't suppose we can drag anyone in
Right.
that does not wish to come in,
Yeah.
and that certainly is their prerogative.
I guess I would, wonder what other medium offers this level of equality on that playing field. I mean, if somebody writes a nasty article about you in the newspaper, you may be able to get a letter in the paper saying this was wrong, or, in the best of all circumstances, you might get them to print a small little retraction that nobody will see. If there's TV news programs run into this problem all the time. Well, they'll run something and the company that it's about or the individual it's about will complain, and it's not necessarily even heard on that same show or on that TV station. It's very small compared to the original broadcast. I mean, public access TV at the very least allows you to have that same level of response that the original broadcast was. That's I would say, it's probably as fair as you can find out there, more fair than you're going to find anywhere else.
Right. Well, I mean, that kind of leads me to a conundrum that access centers have in this regard. Somebody else wrote, and I don't know if I'll find this one. Oh yeah, here it is. So he responds, it's tricky. We had a political squabble here in Traverse City. A producer was airing a tape with a Democratic rally and lots of Democratic speeches. The local Republicans complained. I offered them a chance to come on and say their piece. They didn't want that. What they wanted was to stop the Democrats from being on. That is, after all, equal time. We aren't using any, therefore they shouldn't get any.
Well, that's nonsense as far as I'm concerned. That's because if I wanted to say something on a public access station, what it would amount to is the person that disagrees with me just shuts me down. And that, in effect, is what would happen if the Republicans, in this case, had their way.
Right.
I mean, you say something I disagree with, and so rather than provide argument or a balance, as we're talking about, I just pull the switch.
Right.
How long can you go on like that?
I mean, our whole society, our whole democracy is based on the free exchange of ideas, and having that opportunity and to say, well, we're going to restrict this right off the bat so we can't even talk about these things. Obviously there's going to be some restrictions on what you can talk about on TV, but just this whole idea, well, I don't like this and I disagree with it, so it's got to go away. Jay Wagner, another one of our board members, sent an email to me a couple weeks ago, and it was a quote to the effect of, well, opinions and points of view are only anathema to dictators, which is to say,
Right.
in any healthy democracy can handle the exchange of ideas and opinions. It's only ones that are based on totalitarianism that just won't put up with it.
Right. And then, I mean, when we haven't yet, and I'm sure the people watching close to controversy are saying, well, they have not yet recognized that they're potentially talking about unprotected free speech. I mean, because it's kind of an expected response, of even a publisher that's publishing something that is unpopular is to point to free speech issues, right? So in the case we're talking about, some people might say, well, free speech is well and good. We're talking about slander, which is the vocal version of libel, defamation, and so on. And I don't know if I want to jump right ahead to that, because in a way what we wanted to talk about is how we deal with controversial issues in general, even though we know we have this very specific case in front of us. And maybe to do that, this response from Mike Croce at TCTV2, I think all public access stations end up with these acronyms, But yeah, he responds to the idea of equal time, nobody getting any time being equal time. Well, he says that's also censorship, effectively. You don't offer any alternatives. Well, we can talk about that. You can't stop the attacking group. He writes parenthetically, I don't think, because there's a lot of legal discussion about this, without risking a First Amendment legal challenge. At least we can't here at TCTV2 because we are a public forum, which I think is a term with legal implications because of a Supreme Court discussion. It may be possible for the attack group to find friends to come on public access and defend them, or at least put in a good word. They could not dignify the attack with a response. And maybe that's where we end up in our particular case, where the attack is not being dignified with a response. So we don't really necessarily have our forum even to offer as the consolation prize. The consolation prize isn't wanted or needed. There's just this anger that they've been dragged into an arena that they don't want to be dragged into like that. And he says, I guess I don't understand where you're coming from, because I wrote just that enigmatically. I didn't want to promulgate the case anymore. Why would the opportunity to come on and say their piece not be enough? What more would you want to do? And maybe we could take that up later. I don't know, something that I did want to talk about was the controversial programming guide that I got from the Alliance for Community Media. And I think for people watching this, or the people that will watch this, it has very interesting points on how we see ourselves in this drama as the Access Center. And I don't know, it had a section called Key Actors, and I know I'm kind of rehearsing this for you guys, but bear with me. When our controversial programming came up, the executive committee met, right? And
Yeah.
And I don't know, Bill, maybe you want to be narrative about that. I mean, what did the executive committee come up with in that session, the issue before them, to say, well, gee, we've got this potentially slanderous program. What are we going to do about it? Are we going to suppress it right off the bat?
Well, there's some background here. The current board, at the time this programming began to be telecast, had barely been seated. I mean, we were still utterly unfamiliar with the budget, with the procedures, with the programs. And then this controversial program appeared. I think there was some warning of it, but speaking for myself, that went over my head. I thought television, controversy, sure, what's news? What else is news? And then there was quite a bit of resentment and backlash and argument about it. Well, that drove the board to the point of having to decide, shall we shut this program off? And and the board decided not to do so. Chiefly, I believe, because we now begin studying programming policy. If, for example, you want to put on a commercial message, I'm selling Pepsi-Cola, and I'd like to have Pepsi-Cola lavishly described and advertised on MCAT, that wouldn't be possible. The board or the staff, for that matter.
Even if we gave equal time to Coke.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, would say no, you can't do commercial advertising. Or there were other clear restrictions, copyright. If we took something from a commercial station and rebroadcast it, obviously this is wrong. Then the thing got a little shakier when we sat and talked about it all. and the parties involved were there and questioned. How about indecency or immodesty or pornography, for that matter? Well, you can't do that either. Of course, it was never quite clear how you define all these things, but it was agreed that the board would have to make a determination. And you put something off the telecast on that basis if the board agreed. There were a few other little restrictions, libel, slander, but nobody knows what that is. Juries and judges are notoriously astounding when they decide what is libel and what is not libel, so they don't really know either till they get a case before them, and then it's who knows. So we can't sit and decide whether something is libelous. So that was really all there was to go on, and so what was being said, and let's name it, it was the Poverello program and programs. There was no, what we could see, basis to discontinue the program going by our own rules. And that led to a desire, I think, by some of the members to, at some time in the future, to reconsider the rules. And how do you arrive at these rules? And should there be more rules or less rules? And is this just a place where you can wander in and get a little help and put something on TV and say just about anything you want? Let the chips fall where they may, no matter who it may harm. And the person that's being harmed may not be in a position to respond. And so that's how that all got to the stage of editing, censor, call it what you like. Newspapers, TV do it all the time. They have to do it. The Missoulian, if it had as much print as the New York Times, couldn't get all the news in Missoula in a daily edition. Right. And as far as advertising, Missoulian, like any other newspaper or TV or public media, they say, no, you can't put that in our paper, or yes, you can. This isn't anything that anybody's uneasy about or ashamed about. That's the way the world works. And so we kind of gave that idea up because we are not a private corporation. We are a franchisor of a city, a government organization, a government entity, and our rules would be a little different.
Yeah, I mean, just to go to, you know, okay, the information, because you've given that scenario, and remarkably enough, it's kind of followed the national guidelines that I get when I appeal to the Alliance for Community Media for guidance in this. So what they wanted us to stress, what they thought was a good idea to stress was, and we need to talk about why we're in this position probably more clearly, is that the key actors in any controversy in their minds, and kind of in the minds of this handbook that the board enforced, is that the Access Center provides the channel, the means of production, and serves to try to educate the viewers, the speakers, all of the actors in the drama about what access means. In the government, following guidance provided by the First Amendment, attempts to stay out of free speech issues if it at all can, because it is the government. And so, as you're saying, the MCAT being franchised with the city by extension, though, and this is debatable, apparently there are court cases going this way and going that way, is a government entity, and as such is kind of more restricted from getting involved in free speech issues and trying to act as a gatekeeper on the free speech issues.
I think, yeah.
However, I just want to get through that part,
Okay.
I'm sorry, Michael, that the county attorney or the district attorney receives complaints that laws have been broken, and that office decides whether they're going to prosecute or not. And then the courts provide the method for establishing and determining the legality of the issue at hand. So, I mean, I just want to recap what I feel that scenario was, that the executive committee met, the executive committee looked at the programming policy guidelines that are in force here and said, you know, we cannot tell legally whether it fits this definition or not. So, and because access centers have such a long history of exercising prior restraint, I mean, not exercising prior restraint, of not acting as an editorial entity at all, and then this figures strongly in how they're viewed, for instance, in Supreme Court cases, that this board elected not to exercise that prior restraint and say, you know, we know what's going on, and this show is out of here. However, if this particular scenario, for instance, goes through this drama to the point where an injunction is offered, this is what we're going to follow, right?
Well, have to have no alternative, the same as anybody else. And where the difficulty arises, mostly, I think, is the distinction you made. We are not KPAX or KECI. There's no stockholders, there's no profit, there's no privatization here at all, really. We are beholding to the city of Missoula, whereby the franchise comes.
Yeah.
And in that sense, it'd be difficult to argue that we're just another private business here, and I don't think that sort of reasoning would hold up at all.
Right, because that is something, I mean, it seemed like we had, you know, an invitation to address it, and I'll cite it, you know, from the Missoulian editorial that we assume is written by Steve Woodruff. And I'm quoting here, "The nature of public access television doesn't excuse MCAT from the same responsibilities that other broadcasters or publishers shoulder." We're kind of saying, you know...
Well, I'm not kind of saying it, I'm saying it. He's dead wrong.
Right.
He ought to go back and or talk to some of the lawyers that work for the Missoulian and find out that distinctions are made galore in the courts.
Yeah.
And have been and continue to be. And we can't restrain people. Now, I live in fear of the Ku Klux Klan, or I don't know what, the Chinese Communist Party or something will come by,
Right.
And want to put a program on.
Maybe they could do a show together.
Yes, and we'd have a little controversy there.
Indeed.
But on what basis would we deny them?
Oh, yeah. I have an example, because I did, you know, some of the legal stuff out of there. An instance in Kansas City where just such a thing happened. You know, somebody got a hold of this show, Race and Reason, that was produced by the KKK. It happened to former director of MCAT, Randy Ammon, in Pocatello, Idaho, and he developed a series of strategies, you know, to deal, and we could talk a little bit about that.
Well, the KKK used their facilities to film this, or?
Well, I don't know where the program was created, but they presented it to the Kansas City Public Access as an imported programming item.
Which the Kansas City Access customarily would take such.
Well,
well,
yeah.
I don't mean KKK, but
right.
anything.
Yeah. So what they tried to do to get out of that, they were so upset about feeling compelled to air this program that they shut the Access Center down, rather than run this racist program, Race and Reason. And they were taken to court for doing that. And what was interesting about it was that the district court there ruled that the Access Center could not be shut down to prohibit a particular program, because that was the motive for the shutdown. It could be shut down for other reasons. You know, that people were disinterested in it, they thought it wasn't a viable service, whatever. But in that particular instance, what they had done to the public arm of the PEG, the Public Educational Governmental, was they removed the public part and said, you know what, there's no more public access here anyway. You know, we're more of an education governmental station, to try to prevent that, and the court sided on the side of the KKK. Yeah, that an attempt to dissolve, to prohibit the exercise of free speech, however slanderous that might be considered, you know, to a whole group of people, wasn't going to wash in that instance.
No, I don't know what would happen if some organization came by with a clip which met our production standards, that we could telecast it, and it was something just outrageous, not obscene, not indecent, but very much against the general philosophical views of this town or this
Right.
state. How are we to prevent such a thing? If that was our intent, it'd be nice if we could get the opposite numbers to come in and,
Right.
and maybe even have
Maybe that
a
happens.
discussion.
You know,
Yes,
on
but
the balance.
usually if the KKK attacks somebody, it's somebody, maybe somebody far away, and they don't even know it, or the person attacked may be very reticent to come forward and try to defend himself.
You know, when I think really sort of a metaphoric response to this is when the Nazis marched in Kerr Lane this summer, and some people went there to be there who disagreed with them very much, as I think we all do. There were perhaps a dozen or two Nazis out there on the street, and there were 1,000 people who were saying, these people are wrong, these people are dead wrong. The message that people who saw that parade got was, wow, listen, if you hear all the voices out there, you know, this voice of hatred, this voice of unreason gets drowned out. And I think that's what free speech is all about. It's giving everybody an opportunity to speak. And when you have a chance to hear everybody, you can, you know, you can pretty much
more at
figure
the
out.
truth,
Yeah.
kind of in a sense of, you know, where are people's sensibilities, let's say, on a broad issue like race or reason.
Instead of relying on a few people or the MCAT board to tell you, well, this is what you should hear and this is what you shouldn't hear. Well, let it all go out there, and the good stuff will, you know, rise to the top,
Right,
and the bad
right.
stuff will sink and look even worse by comparison.
Yeah, I mean, because you know, I don't want to belabor that point of notions of, you know, MCAT as the common carrier or as the library in which they're simply, you know, we're passively allowing volumes.
Well,
to
any
go through.
library in the United States censors books. They don't permit certain books in the library, and they do permit others, and they couldn't possibly buy all the books in the world and
Oh,
put them
yeah,
in a Missoulian
yeah.
library. So they have to say, well, which books will we take? That means we won't take some others. And if I had written a book lauding the great merits of the KKK and how we're going to rise again and so forth, and had it published and wanted the library board here in Missoula to put that in there, especially for high school reading, I shouldn't be surprised if they censor it, if they say, no, you can't, we won't put that in.
Right.
And in this day and age, if there are other things that are probably just offensive to other people, they'd say, well, yeah, sure, we'll put that in. Other politically correct and popular views, or at least popular with the media.
Well, and I think there's a lot of examples that we've all seen in the recent years where library boards and school boards have censored books that you can understand why. You know, Huck Finn has been thrown out of a
That's
bunch
right.
of libraries. Other books that, you know, obviously have a lot of value are being disqualified because a small group of people say, well, we don't think people should read this and hear
Well,
this.
they have to. They have to make a decision on which books to buy and which books not to buy, which books to throw out and which ones to keep. And I don't know how you want to define it, but that is censorship.
A kind of a filtration process.
Yeah, it's keeping the public, the taxpayer, from some material that he might like to see and presenting him with something he doesn't want to see, and you hope or read, and you hope the library board is attuned enough not to add fuel to the fire with the taxpayer by saying, look at the way they're spending my money now, that they
Right.
can at least keep pretty much on target.
And that's what, you know, public access TV was established in the spirit that this will be pretty much pure free speech. It's one of the real few examples of it you get out there. And as such, you know, free speech is a very powerful thing. And the idea in public access TV is it's so powerful, the only way to keep balance is to give it to everyone.
Or the only way to act as a filtration is to refer to the legal system to determine what is unprotected speech. Unless, as you say, it's completely clear, you know, as a piece of commercialism
And there are cases, yeah, where
or
even,
copyright infringement.
or libel. I mean, sometimes that's very clear, or slander. But I don't think there's been, Bill, maybe you know this, but has there ever been a session of the Supreme Court where they didn't have a First Amendment case on the docket? I mean,
No, I doubt it.
yeah, I mean,
Not
they've
nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
They can get ready for more, I'm sure.
been redefining this piece of paper
and
for
the
a couple hundred
legislation
years.
can be so new, because there's so many issues that may be analogous between public access and the internet, where if the posture is we are not exercising any prior restraint at all, we are like the internet in the sense that the internet does not exercise prior restraint. It is more inert in that sense that it waits for outside forces to say, hey, you can't do that,
I mean, we have more prior restraint actually than the internet. I mean, we don't allow obscene things and pornography on,
Right.
or things that are patently libelous.
Yeah, I mean, I know, I was impressed with the amount of legal material that was in the Alliance Controversial Programming Guide. And I don't know if I'm going to bore you guys with this, but I know there are people that either are watching or will watch that are very interested in what we feel is the foundation for this posture of common carrier. So I'll just try to, energize what might be to many people a pretty boring legal narrative. What seemed to be a really important case was something called the Denver Area Educational Consortium, which challenged a provision in the 1992 Cable Television Consumer Protection Act that specifically addressed content on PEG access channels. So what was kind of going on was the legislature was trying to clamp down more on what PEG access seemed to be offering, which was mayhem in their minds, and somewhat the sentiments, Bill, you are expressing. The law would have allowed the cable operator, like in this instance AT&T, the people that actually allow, put in the signal out, to determine obscenity standards and to determine unlawful conduct and act as a censor in this regard. So a highly divided Supreme Court, so they're still saying highly divided, it's very new stuff, right, ruled that this section violated the First Amendment. The court ultimately rejected what is called the traditional strict scrutiny standard of review. The justices that struck it down, and this is Kennedy and Breyer writing in plurality, indicated that no definite choice among competing First Amendment analogies, and these are like broadcast media, the common carrier notion, or a bookstore or library, allow us to declare a rigid single standard that is good for now and all future media and purposes. So they were noting factors that distinguished PEG access channels from libraries, from newspapers, from bookstores, from almost any other media animal out there. And here we have it. One, a history that demonstrates that cable operators, meaning the access board or managers, have never exercised editorial control over PEG programming. Two, that the institutional structure of PEG access centers have, and this is you guys, locally accountable bodies capable of addressing the problem. Three, the justices recognize inherent in PEG access is the existence of a system aimed at encouraging and securing program that the community considers valuable. So they're kind of taking on its merits in a way, saying, you know what, we are not going to apply really strict standards of determining what is unprotected speech on your channel, because you've demonstrated a number of these criteria that indicate you are really after a public forum. And because they're so partial to these First Amendment issues, they're kind of willing to allow that it's going to go over less strict scrutiny. So essentially what happened in that Cable Consumer Protection Act was that they removed sections that would have allowed the cable operator to say, you know what, it's my system and I'm not allowing this on my system, to treat the PEG access channel as though it was a piece of private property, like a publisher. And then, I know I'm going too far with some of this. There's one other thing, and this is a case called Caprati versus the town of Woodstock, and it's fairly recent. It was December of 1998, and it was a decision by an appellate court in upstate New York. And the ruling used language in this very same Federal Cable Television Consumer Protection and Competition Act of 1992 to bar defamation action. So this, at least in the one instance that has occasioned our visit here, seems pretty germane. The plaintiffs contended that the producer used his weekly program to promote, quote, a campaign of harassment against the plaintiffs by making derogatory, inflammatory, and defamatory remarks. And so, the section that this appellate court cited because they went after them, they said, you know, you have really wrecked our situation and we want money, compensatory damages. This appellate court said, in any court proceeding involving any claim against the franchising authority arising from the regulation of cable service or from a decision of approval or disapproval with respect to a grant, renewal, transfer, or amendment of franchise, any relief, and this is the important part, any relief shall be limited to injunctive and declaratory relief. And then further, the court wrote that, there's a quote, the ability of a public access channel to provide a forum for robust and unrestrained public discourse would be jeopardized if viewers allegedly damaged by such programming could seek monetary damages from franchising authorities. And they kind of included this sort of like, well, here's one case. And of course, as you've mentioned time again, nobody knows what the legal system holds out. I mean, I'm just kind of offering this, you know, as this is where some of the more recent legislation has gone. And kind of to prove, you know, to a degree that the MCAT board isn't out of its mind. You know, I mean, because some people might
Well,
say,
not on this issue.
Right. Well, not on this issue. Okay. Or at least, you know, that there's some basis and thoughtful and, you know, somewhat solemn procedure. I mean, you know, I'm not going to be personal about this matter only to say, for me, you know, one of my problems is to be pathologically empathetic. You know, I hear a story and I'm just kind of like, oh man, you know, identify with this story. And then I hear another story and they could be completely opposing. And then I find myself kind of in the middle thinking, gee, you know, and maybe that makes me, you know, pathologically suited for this job. I don't know. Because it is kind of a crazy position to be in. You know, it's not a very enviable position to be in a community. You know, somebody called complaining about a show, and, you know, I think it was about 5 minutes into it, and he said, you know, what are you guys there for anyway? And I said, we're here to be slapped around, you know, because in a way that's how I felt, you know, that we were providing what is a fairly gallant service in the name of First Amendment principles. You know, if anyone says, well, is this any way to conduct business, you know, we could be shut down at any moment. And the only answer I could think of is that, yeah, it is really a rather perilous undertaking, you know. I was telling you, Bill, that we should, for a set decoration, have the New Hampshire license plates slogan, live free or die would be kind of like an appropriate.
Well, it's you know, it's, as I said, it's the basis of our society. As Judge Learned Hand said, you know, free speech is messy and it's maddening and it's difficult, but we've bet everything on it, you know, and I think the Supreme Court and the federal courts are always very reluctant to have any restraint or very incremental restraints against free speech for that reason. And when we make a decision, the board, about, well, whether we should practice prior restraint against a program, we have that full weight of American history and federal court decisions trying to keep us away from doing it. So it's a weighty decision and process.
I agree with you. I mean, you know, something that I think is an analogous instance that kind of happens, you know, and maybe, you know, I think of this kind of reeling from, you know, being declaimed in the community paper as being bad or whatever, that examples of city council and school board hearings, they are open public forums, right? So it doesn't just happen here. You know, I was recounting a story, and I'll be, you know, oblique about it. Somebody was upset about the way the police came to their home to handle a domestic dispute, and they didn't like the way things happened. So the cameras are running. The program is going out live into whomever it's reaching. It's a city council meeting, and this individual goes to the podium and says, you know, Officer blank and Officer blankety blank are thugs with guns who should be fired. There you have it. It just happened. I didn't turn the switch off, you know, trying to anticipate what he was going to say.
Should you turn it off?
I don't know. And then I reran it the next day.
Yeah.
Nobody called me up and said, you know, you better stop. You don't show that part.
Well, and you know, before MCAT began broadcasting those meetings were still taking place as open forums where it's allowed people to come up and say things in public I mean, this is larger than a cable access issue. Are the people on the city council or the school board liable for somebody coming up to a microphone and saying something?
I don't know.
You know, should they
Well,
shut down that microphone because somebody
School
might
board
say
last
something?
month, an individual came up, you know, and said to the superintendent, you know, I've heard that you're sexist and insensitive or something like that, you know, and there was a heated exchange of words.
No, that's going to be more and more and more, and the body, be it the city council or the school board, in a sense, brings it on itself, because the more they encourage public comment, and instead of attending only or specifically to their business, the more they're going to have that, because people are getting more and more frustrated, and they're looking for ways to express it. And what's nicer than to walk into the city council and be a TV star for 15 seconds?
Well, that's possible, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
But
I mean, on the other hand, you know, it's hard to question the motives of anyone that takes that upon themselves, too, you know. I mean, there's something about, you know, something came up here was kind of like a legal term, you know, talking about, okay, like what is to prevent anyone from using this facility to create great harm, you know, through slander, defamation, whatever, you know, chaos.
Sure.
And we say, gee, you know, there's the courts, and so however long that process is, you know, we don't want any part of it. But, I mean, there is the community, right? And so here, in some of the legal material come along a phrase called enlightened self-interest, which prevents people from doing outrageous things. It prevents them from parading naked in the street because they're angry. Similarly, it prevents them from coming down here and borrowing equipment to make outrageous accusations that are unfounded, you know. And still, I don't want to reflect on the controversy that's going on here, you know, other than to say that I think both parties are very committed to their points of view.
Oh, yeah,
and that
that's
they
why there's
fervently
controversy.
believe what they believe. And that, to a degree, you know, what prevents people from getting in this situation? Because they own a house, they own a car, they own business, they own property that informs their enlightened self-interest. Now, when you have somebody that doesn't have that kind of restraint, yeah, you've got a wild card, because they're not as, you know, in a fiscal sense, they're not that integrated into the community.
They don't have the investment.
Yeah.
But, you know, I don't think the law, there's nothing in the First Amendment about you have to own property in order to exercise it.
no.
You know, I think all people.
I'm just saying that a natural impulse, you know, an answer to a question is like, well, why doesn't all kinds of chaos break out? Because it is a community. And because people do exercise enlightened self-interest, you know, and I'm painting a rather negative picture, like, gee, they just want to protect their property so they don't speak their minds.
No.
But what I mean is that they're integrated into the community as such that, you know, perhaps this place you could argue, I suppose, that it reflects, you know, the neurosis in Missoula just as well as it reflects the arts, the culture, the politics. And you could call all those the neurosis of the community if you wanted to as well.
Well, there's more and more tension building, and more uneasiness.
Yeah.
And people are looking around for places to express it. The graffiti on the wall as you come under on Orange Street there, any place. And I think that's going to continue.
Well, and I think that makes it even more important for them to have options to express themselves peaceably in a public forum, so they'll be heard. I mean, I believe in large part violence is a form of frustrated communication that people take when they don't feel like they can communicate.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I wonder, you know, if people who have cable access shows, you know, I think are communicating something they need to communicate.
Oh, yeah. That's a good point, Mike, because I've often felt, you know, that terrorism actually has a very strong relationship to frustrated access to media. You have groups that feel like no one is paying attention to their problems, right? They say, well, they're too poor to be heard, to be reliable, to be telling the truth. Or, you know, they're Kurds way over the heck here, or they're, you know, Lebanese that are fed up, or whatever it is. They can't get access to the media without they hijack a plane or kill 12 people at random like that. But I mean, it's a rather interesting, you know, it's a media issue, really, because that's what they're after. They're after an ear, and they're not even talking about a sympathetic ear in terrorist cases. They're simply after an ear.
Yeah, and some of them, you know, would have done it anyway and are psychopaths, whatever. But I think we have to give people as much chance to vent as possible in a peaceable way. I wonder, you know, had Timothy McVeigh had his own cable access show where he could go out there and talk his trash every day.
Whether
you
let's
know.
say he felt invested in the community
Yeah.
because he was part of public access.
I mean, he would have offended a lot of people every day, and people would have been gritting their teeth, but maybe there'd be a couple hundred more people alive.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, there's some kamikaze views, you know, of what public access is, and some of it is reflected in this alliance document, where, you know, someone says something like, as soon as you talk about any form of censorship or control, it's no longer public access. It might be called community programming, with community standards applied or something, and responsive, even, you know, and that's another unenviable position that we're in. Responsive to the community, like the library may be like, well, this community's tastes kind of tend to this, but, you know, they certainly don't like racist stuff. Whereas, you know, in Knoxville, oh, no, I'm kidding. So anyway, well, the point of that is saying as soon as you introduce any notion of acting as a filter, not only do you lose some of the protections awarded by the Supreme Court, for instance, saying, gee, you know, they're editorializing, they're turning into a piece of private property, but it's no longer public access. It might be called community programming or something like that. But as I say, these may be very hard lines. And I don't think, particularly, I don't think that the board has to be monolithic in its viewpoint on this, you know, and that it is a really tough road.
Well, I mean, I think what you find is a lot of people take very hard, strident stances when it comes to free speech, whether you got to allow everything or you can only allow certain things. And in fact, it's a large gray area in there, and it's, you know, the discussion, as we said, continues on in our federal courts, it continues on in our newspapers, it continues on here. And it's because it's a very complicated issue, it's a very powerful issue, and it's a very important issue. And I think we need to talk about it as much as possible.
Well, if you recall, it never came to fruit, but the board considering this censorship or editing or whatever you want to call it, and how do you avoid it and what is it, it sort of got to the point where they were considering getting people who deal with this problem frequently or daily. Certainly anybody that publishes anything or anybody that in any way is deciding what to put on a TV show all over the world has to decide, well, does this go on or does this not go on? And that immediately brings up the issue of, well, what criteria are you using? What are your rules? What are the program planning permit? And as I recall, we were thinking about trying to get somebody from the university, people around town that have knowledge of this, lawyers, media people, press perhaps, at least a few of them, to come by sometime and just sit around with the board and try to explain how they go about it and why. And what does that have to do with MCAT? And how would that apply to us? So that we get a better focus on what we ought to be doing and what we should not be doing in a way of restricting access. Because that's what we're talking about, is restricting access. And just like I say, while the camera's running there, if suddenly a big Toyota ad appeared here behind me and I got up and spent 30 seconds talking about it, I think I would be in major trouble.
Right.
And
so you're saying there is some restriction anyway? Well, there certainly is.
Oh, there has to be. There has to
so if that door is open, what is allowed in that door? You know, I mean, because I don't want to put you on the spot, Bill, but I do remember, you know, after you guys had taken that vote, I don't think it was sitting well with you. I remember we had a discussion where you kind of felt, you know, I think you used the analogy like, well, gee, you know, it's like, the analogy was, you know, we have some guns here, and, you know, we have the guns and we advertise, you know, we've got guns here, and people come in and we say, well, you know, this is how you shoot the gun, this is how you load it, you know. Be sure to clean the gun when you're done with it. And heck, they go out and shoot somebody, and we say, has nothing to do with us.
We
you
have
know,
nothing to do with that. Yeah,
Remember you brought that up. Now, you can respond to that. I just like I was talking to somebody about it, and they said, well, that's like wanting to sue the School of Journalism, where where journalists came from because they trained him. Let's say a journalist is involved in a libelous situation. Well, you go back to Columbia School of Journalism and sue his teachers because they taught him, how to write newspaper articles. But I don't know. I mean, I still want to give you some time, and without feeling like you're on the spot, if you've got some dissatisfaction.
What frustrated me is I didn't think the rules that we use, or that are now in effect, that I didn't think the rules were clear enough or adequate enough. And I certainly didn't want to go beyond the rules and say I'm going to make up a new rule, or I'm going to disregard the MCAT rules, or I'm going to twist them so that they can be interpreted this way. No, I think we ought to have better rules to decide what goes out on TV and what does not. And be able to say, and here is why. Now, there may be argument whether that applies in this case or that case, but at least we've got something that we can argue about instead of just a personal whim. Well, I don't like those kind of people anyway, so don't show that program, type of thing.
Something more intelligent than that, let's say. Something more even-handed than that.
Yes, and I thought perhaps we could someday arrange something like that if anybody has interest, or maybe we could generate some interest.
Yeah, because, I mean, I'm pathologically empathetic. I'm not going to take any point of view in this. I mean, except to observe, perhaps, that what seems like, in my survey of access centers and what's done, and I do not mean to denigrate this at all, but what seems to be done, and maybe it's a knee-jerk thing, is to reaffirm First Amendment and programming policy. That happened here, and I remember you abstained from that vote.
That's exactly what happened.
There's another case I got out of Hawaii, and this should make people feel a little better. That doesn't, this is not, a Missoula issue. I mean, this occurs all the time.
Oh, it's all over.
This is
because it'll never stop. There's got to be, if you're going to put anything out, you've got to edit it.
Yeah. I mean, here's official links to Weekend Isle suicides to Olelo, I'm probably not pronouncing that right, video. And so here in Hawaii, there was a video about assisted suicide. It aired on a Friday, and by Monday, 2 people were dead in the manner that the video described. And, pretty much what they did was they reaffirmed their commitment to free speech, and they felt like they did the right thing in airing the program.
Well, see, there's a case in point. It's against the law for a doctor to use an injection or medicinal means to kill somebody in this state, even if they ask for it. And so I've got a nice clip from Oregon, and I'd like to show it. It shows you how to do it.
Right.
And it shows you how you can get away with it and how you do all this whole thing. Do we want to air that? If we don't, why not? Is it copyrighted? Well, the guy that owns it has waived the copyright. Is it porno? No. Not porno. Is it commercial? No, I didn't say what the brand was that you inject. And I'm certainly not advertising that brand. And what do we do? Yeah. And if we fall back on the rules we have now, I don't know if they would sustain us. No. And yet we just shrug and say, well, that may do some harm in this community, but we're not responsible, or it's free speech. Somebody, your tolerance would break eventually if you kept pushing, not just on assisted suicide, but the KKK, on and on and on.
Right.
At some point, you'd have to say no, and you look at the rules, and there, in my opinion, is not a good reason to say no.
Well, I don't think there are any rules in any organization, any public organization, that are sufficient to answer all those questions. I mean, that's why we still keep having these discussions 225 years after the fact, and why the Supreme Court is bedeviled with this issue every session, and why, this raises so much controversy. Free speech is sort of inherently controversial, I think.
Well, let me give you, for instance, suppose somebody did come in and say, this is the way, and we've got photos and we've got all kinds of documentary evidence, or documentary material here. Here is how you can kill this public official that everybody detests, and we're going to show it. Would you show it?
I think that probably falls under the same category as yelling fire in a crowded theater, where you are inciting.
Well, there isn't anything about yelling fire in the rules.
Right, but I think that...
You just stay with an arbitrary decision, or at least a personal decision, is that it?
I think inciting violence is covered, has been covered in federal court. I may be wrong, but I don't think you can intentionally incite violence against someone or cause that. That would be my interpretation of that.
Well,
And I would vote against. I would vote against airing that program, and
yeah, but
I'd tie myself to the camera to keep them from filming it.
no, but I think that we can do better with those rules. Get something in there that will give you something to cite.
Mm-hmm. And I think, what happens is rules tend to be rewritten by case. As you know, the Supreme Court, you're not allowed to bring up a law before the court unless you have an actual case of someone being damaged. And I think, we need to keep this discussion open, keep it going, invite as many people as want to be involved in it with it, and also be careful when a case like that comes up to say, okay, here's a chance to revisit this issue, and here's a chance to refine our rules and make them better and make them stronger.
Well, I can't argue with that, yeah. Oh, yeah. I hope we do, because it's sort of a difficult situation, I think.
Oh, I know.
Not at the moment so much, but I can see, maybe falsely, but I can see clouds gathering that how are we going to operate in such a way that we can justify what we're doing?
Mm-hmm. I mean, as I say, it's not a very enviable position to be in its pure sense of public access, where maybe someone might even argue that this program detailing murder or whatnot, applying the same rules, you would say, well, that's for court to decide. So they wait for somebody to take the action necessary to file an injunction to prevent that program from being aired. But that the governing body of the Access Center still says, hands off, we are the provider, the passive conduit of this information. And that is a belief system that a lot of access centers subscribe to. Maybe, happily for many, they're never tested, really hard in that. I mean, just as you're saying, gee, that we could be filled with chaos, you might have to refer to, the sense of community, that not all of these horrible things are going to happen at the same time. I don't
but
you're saying that if this position is carried to its logical conclusion, it's not very palatable to you.
Well, it's because I think there's nothing definite to go by. Or it isn't definite enough. And to say we're just a passive conduit, we're not, because we've already got some rules.
Right.
That screen some people.
Yeah. Okay, so we're getting a signal that our time here is up. I want to thank my guests once I'm on camera. It doesn't matter. Off camera, I'm going to thank my guests for being Bill Norman, Michael Reagan, members of Board of Directors of Missoula Community Access. I'm Joel Baird, a staff member here. And I want to thank the viewers for watching.